Well, good morning. It is my opportunity before you this morning to give you some insight into Europe. My wife, family, and myself lived in Europe for more than 20 years until coming here to join Chuck and Nancy Missler in New Zealand in their ministry here. And so I've been an alien for a long time. So when people ask me where I'm from, I honestly don't know anymore. I lived in Europe for so long. The accent doesn't betray the amounts of tea that I've drank to try to change my accent, but that didn't seem to do very good. But at any rate, I want to speak about what I'm sort of tongue-in-cheek going to refer to as the state of the disunion. You get State of Union statements, but we're going to be looking at Europe as the state of the disunion, what's happening there. We're going to take a look at the historic background, first of all, of Europe. Europe is historically been, in modern times, a very dominant feature worldwide. From the 16th century to the 20th century, Europe really was the dominating force worldwide. There wasn't an area on the planet, for the most part, that was significant that did not have a European influence. Spain, of course, predominantly in South America, England in North America, South Africa, India, Asia. In fact, it was said at one point that the sun never set on the British Empire. The French, of course, in North America, Central and South Africa, Asia, really, and not to diss any other countries, of course, there were the Dutch and others that were also exporting through colonialism their influence around the world. But by the end of the 19th century, these connections began to weaken, and some would refer to it as evil influences began to flow back into Europe. Now, I'm not necessarily convinced that was the case. I think it was the matter of fact that the chicks came home to really where they'd been sent out. And thus, as we came into the 20th century, Europe tries to destroy itself really in two world wars that were a legacy of their colonial era. A lot of what happened in World War I came as a result of really brewing things from the colonial era. As a result of that, there was ultimately the formulation of what we know today as the European Union. In 1951, April 18th, there was the Treaty of Paris, and really this was an economic agreement. It was the European Coal and Steel Community. They said, let's get our industry together first. In 1957, March 25th, there was the Treaties of Rome. There was the European Economic Community was established and the European Atomic Energy Community. So they began to link first commercially and then scientifically. By 1958, March 19th, they established the European Parliament. 1959, there's their Benelux group formed. And so in 1967, we have the merger of all of these economic groups into really the foundation for the European Union. I remember years ago when the European Union was first really coming together, there was quite a bit of interest to see how that was going to form. And of course, within Christian circles, when the number 8, they were concerned what was going to happen when it reached the magic 10 countries. Well, of course, if you look at Europe today, there are 27 countries: Austria, Belgium, Bulgaria, Cyprus, the Czech Republic, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, France, Germany, Greece, Hungary, Ireland, Italy, Latvia, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Malta, Netherlands, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia, Spain, Sweden, and the United Kingdom now comprise the European Union. And also it's important to recognize that as you speak of the European Union, you are not always speaking about the common currency. There is a subset of these that have a commitment to share the same currency, and we'll deal with that a little later on in this presentation. So you have the formation of this state. Now, when you look at it as no longer just a geopolitical alliance, but really a political force, the European Parliament is made up of the 27 member states, and there are 736 members of the European Parliament. What's interesting, living in Great Britain, if you were to ask local constituents within Great Britain who their member of Parliament in London was, most of them would have some idea. If you ask them what member of the European Parliament they had that was represented them, in most cases, no one knows who they are. And yet they are the presiding force within Europe, because laws made in the European Union supersede laws made in sovereign countries that comprise the European Union. The laws, for example, in Great Britain can be challenged in the European Court of Justice and be overthrown. So really the member states stand subject to the rule of the European Parliament and the legal society. They reside in a facility in Strasbourg, France. Even the design of the building is quite provocative. Many believe that it was built upon the idea of the Tower of Babel. Interestingly enough, in the London Olympics, they wanted to make a lasting artistic representation of the London Olympics. And next to the Olympic Stadium, they have a feature there. And the core part of the feature they refer to as a representation of the Tower of Babel. And so within Europe, the Tower of Babel is seen as a sign of unification. It is not seen as some sort of strange thing that God judged. They represent it frequently as a sign of unity around the Tower of Babel. So many refer to Europe as the European superstate. And many will ask the question, especially within the United Kingdom, is the European Union the United States of Europe? Now, here's a recent statement from the UK Prime Minister Cameron, who says, "I will protect Britain from the European superstate." Now, isn't that a very nice statement to make? Protect him how? All of the major rights of a sovereign country like Great Britain are subject to review and approval by the European Parliament. So he can make these statements to people who are nationalistic. But the truth of the matter is, Great Britain, along with the other 27 states, have effectively handed over their sovereignty to a group who, for the most part, their constituents, more than 500 million people, have no idea who's making the laws that rule over them. So you talk about the concept of taxation without representation. It is never more exemplified than that which you see in Europe. Economically, Europe, it's effectively the third largest economic force on the planet. And Europe, if you've been watching the news, is in, of course, an economic crisis. It's like the sinking of this great big cruise liner off the Italian coast. It typifies that even though it was struck and was sinking, people were denying that it was in trouble. And that's exactly what Europe is like. It is struck with financial trouble from which it cannot extricate itself, and yet it continues to broadcast the idea that we're okay, we're going to be all right. Of course, in headlines, we see the failure of Greece. And they're sort of the poster child of the economic failure of Europe. But yet Greece is just the first of 4 nations who are slowly coming to the place of insolvency as a nation. Europe is plagued by what they call the pigs nations. Now, how would you like that for an acronym? Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain. Now, isn't it nice that we sort of relegate these 4 nations as being the bad boys on the block? In January of this year, Standard & Poor's cut the ratings of Italy, Spain, Portugal by 2 notches and downgraded France and Austria. And of course, Europe was astonished by that as they began to see the credit rating of these countries were being downgraded. Of course, at the same time, the United States' credit was being downgraded, so was Germany, so was the United Kingdom. But you see, as long as you have someone else to shine the spotlight on, you won't look at the real prime players. When we take a look at Europe, in financial year 2000, except for Italy, Greece, and Belgium, most of the countries had their foreign borrowing to be equal to less than 100% of their gross national product. By 2005, you begin to see that as the colors change, the core of Europe, Germany and France, are now beginning to fall into the position to where the total national debt as a percentage of gross domestic product is now approaching 75% of their gross domestic product they're borrowing 3/4 of that as money into their economies. But as we look into 2011, we now see that most of the major players in Europe are at a place to where they are in debt at an extreme level. There was an interesting analysis done at the end of 2009, beginning 2010. It was released by the American news company CNBC, and they looked at the world's biggest debtor nations, and they looked at it from the standpoint of how much external debt the country has. You see, it would be like looking at a family. If you have family members and they owe each other money, you may not necessarily be concerned about that because it's all within the family. What you're looking at is external debt. And so this particular analysis looked at the external debt of nations to see how much do they owe people outside of their sovereign borders. And so they looked at the top 20. Number 20 on the hit parade was the United States. Probably no surprise there, since that's a common topic at prophecy conferences, the financial condition of the United States, where 94.3% at the end of 2009 what represented the external debt as a percentage of their gross domestic product, 94%. Their gross external debt at that point was a little over $13.4 trillion, and their 2008 GDP was 14.26. And so almost 100%. They're reaching the point of even then looking like they're insolvent. But that's number 20 on the hit parade. Let's take a look at number 19, Hungary. Probably no surprise there. Their external debt as a percentage of their GDP was 105.7%. We then come to Italy. Well, they're one of the pigs nations, so we shouldn't be surprised. 126.7% external debt. Greece, there's the bad boy. Let's see where they were 16 on the hit parade. 161%. In other words, by comparison, they had an external debt of $552 billion, and their gross domestic product for 2008 was 343. So they are borrowing more than they are producing as a nation. So they are constantly going in debt. It would be like you. Your salary is one thing, and you each year borrow 60% more than you make. You are never going to get out of debt. You're just going to increasingly get into debt. And so that's what that's representing. Let's look at number 15. Well, another one of the pigs nations, Spain. Theirs was 171%, almost 172%. Number 14, Germany. Now that's a surprise. Germany, 178%. Now we'll come on to why that is so, because their credit rating is quite good. So how is it that Germany has such a foreign debt? Remember, what about the sovereign